Welcome to another episode of Sunday Special Property Chat. Today we've got Helen and Adam with us.
Hi everyone.
Morning.
Jay is on childcare duty, so he couldn't join us today. But the two of us are back again to discuss the latest like news from property world, business world, economy world, and as usual, we'll start with what's been covered in the Sunday supplement from Adam. So, Adam, do you want to just take us through like the whatever version for lazy people?
Sure
People who
thing.
haven't had a chance yet to read this, or
So
people
let's go on.
or
That'd be
people
kind.
to reading.
That'd be kind. To be fair, I was a bit late posting it this morning as well, so it's definitely not. It's definitely more my fault than anyone else's. So I've covered in very brief terms. There's a big meeting on Thursday of the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, where they will indirectly address the inflation situation by tinkering with the rate once again. It looks an absolute racing certainty that they're going to put the rates up. The big debate is, will they go up 0.25% or 0.5%? It's not actually being framed as a particularly big debate, because I think the financial markets are looking at it as a relatively low probability. I see it as the second favourite, but I see it as a much closer contest than that. So I'm at about 70-30. I've said 68-30 with 2% chance they don't put the rate up, because there's no such thing as a certainty, of course. But, you know, it seems to me a more live runner than some people are thinking. And if it happens, it will have quite a shock effect to the markets, the way that they're currently pricing it. In the same way that, you know, when we got right close to D-Day, we were at 10% chance of Brexit, I think, just when the votes were coming in at the very beginning, and 90% chance of Remain. And when Brexit was voted for, that's what caused such a shock impact on the markets. This is a similar scenario with a similar live runner, in my view. Talked a little bit about the stock market and what it's done over the past week, especially Friday. And I think where are we? We're a few percent down on the year in the FTSE. We're significantly down on the American markets. This looks like it might be finally enough of a downside move to say we are actually in a bear market, and that makes a lot of sense because of the amount of upside risks there are to things at the moment, because of Ukraine, because of energy in general, because of inflation. Some of these things are related, but they're not, as always, they're not moving in their own little bubbles, you know. But what I've written primarily about this week is about pressure again, different from last time, because I've tried to talk about project specific or construction and project management specific pressures. So all the way down from the macro situation, inflation in the timber market and the wider construction materials market, inflation in commodities in general, inflation in labour prices, tightness of labour markets, and then drilling down to talk a little bit about derivatives and the price of palladium and things like that that's been messed about with since Russia have gone into Ukraine, just in time, and how that model's been put on the back burner / stretched to popping point, really. And then going down a couple of levels into project specific pressures, such as either from poor design or lack of time spent designing, all the way through to clients who change their mind and can't make up their mind all of the time, and how expensive that is, and how contingency is not a figure there in case you want to change what bathroom you're using or whatever. It's there for unseen things, not for poor plan, not to gloss over poor planning and poor design decisions. And then energy performance and how that relates within that, and then all the way into things you actually can control in terms of you yourself, how organised you are or not. That's a big one. Or how organised the people are that you deputise to be organised for you. And then we talked a couple of weeks ago about how we actually deal with pressures, relationships with funders, relationships with contractors, things like that. And then obviously I'm always trying to carry on and learn from refurbs that I've done, and I'm now a few hundred in, and still definitely learning. So there's a bit of food for thought there that hopefully we can develop into a broader chat.
That sounds like a zillion words. There's something for everybody in there.
I would hope so.
That's definitely a subject for a doctorate or a thesis like this. But yeah, I like the focus on. I mean, I think whenever like things go into in the economy on a higher level, they go into some sort of like I'd say bear market, or like things happen that are a bit outside of our control, right? It's good to focus on the things that are within our control, like the project management, like the small things that you can do to protect you from the big things that you can't do nothing about, right?
It's that whole concept of, concern yourself with what you can control when you're going to have external factors pressuring you. 90% of people who are trying to certainly crack into in the early stages of a property development career are reliant on funding one way or another: senior debt, investor money, debt and equity, etc., etc., etc. So there's pressure. There is going to be pressure there, and there's going to be things that you need to make sure you can do. And the only way you can control that is within your circle of confidence and influence and all the rest of it. If you don't get that right, but there's two ways of looking at it, isn't it? If you don't get that right from the start, you're definitely screwed. But if you worry about the things that you can't control and you haven't been able to, if you started developing 12 months ago and you hadn't factored in that materials were already on the rise and they were likely to keep on going up, you'd have got yourself in trouble. So that sort of comes back a little bit to the planning side of things and the forecasting side of things, and what would a good mantra to be at the moment: don't take on marginal projects, and don't take on projects that you're going to rely on selling as the only exit. Now these are good mantras at any time, but at the moment they become really, really important, I think.
Yeah, even more so. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so I mean, with the projects and people kind of going to development, and it's obviously for some people it is quite late, because if they're already in a project, they've already overspent. It's quite difficult to control those things. And like, I mean, what would you advise to people? What would your advice to people be? Because we see a lot of people like coming to try to sell part finished sites or things like that, where things were already out of control. Like, what would your advice be to people that are already in trouble, and maybe they've got investor finance, maybe they've got like funding in place that they have to repay? Like, what would your advice be how to handle situations like this?
Well, it won't surprise you to know my personal feelings would be completely the opposite of what some of the developers tend to do in these situations, which is cut communication, go to Bali or whatever, annoy everyone almost as much as they can, it seems. There's a reality in it. We sometimes talk about like the development hockey stick, right? Where, let's say you've got to demolish a site in order to rebuild something bigger and better in its place. So everybody understands there'll be a point where the site might be worth this at the moment, and then that value is going to come down as you demolish things and all the rest of it before it starts to go back up. But the reality is it's not quite as smooth as that from a hockey stick perspective. And if at any point in that hockey stick on the upward curve, you run out of money, can't do the groundworks, decide partying is more important than developing property, whatever you want to call it. I know I can see Helen nodding sanguinely at these are real life events that I'm basing this story on, right?
Yeah.
It is, if you come off that hockey stick on the way up and contractors are pulled off the job or they pull themselves off the job, the value is going to take another significant haircut, because I don't know that there's a name for it, but maybe we could call it the Sunday special paradox. No contractor has ever been round to another contractor's work and said, oh, nice job, this will be easy to finish off. It just doesn't happen. And I'm not having to go at contractors there, because I know the worst thing you can do to a contractor is ask them to come in halfway, 3/4 of the way, 1/4 of the way through a job. They absolutely hate it, because they can't necessarily see all the things that have or haven't been done. In many ways, it's easier when you know you've been completely ripped off. You know, they've put in 1 square of insulation and taken a photo, and the rest of it's got no insulation. You know, you're dealing with proper cowboys at that point, and you're just going to have to rip out and start again. If you try and pick up from where someone's left off, you know, the damage is really, really tough. So how do you avoid, I mean, there's probably two answers or 2 questions in what you've asked, Piotr, I think, because one is, I'm already in that situation, oh God, please help me. Right. And the other one is, how do I avoid getting into situations like that? Yeah. So I think in terms of the first one, to try and be as constructive as possible, you've got to be transparent and realistic. What I often find in those situations, and look, you've taken a financial loss because of what we talked about with that hockey stick. Yeah. So people offer stuff like you've just described that will come to Hammered all the time, right? And they seem 90% of them follow a very simple process. They try and give you as little information as possible. They effectively lie to you. They won't answer straightforward questions. And what happens in those situations? I just walk away. I'm not interested because I can't trust. There's no relationship of any form of trust with the vendor, right? What's the 10% where I've actually have either been able to help or been the harbinger of doom, unfortunately, in a couple of situations where they've come to me open book and said, look, this is the situation. Is there any way I can JV my way out of it with you? Because what happens when a big site gets repossessed by the first charge or senior debt lender? What happens? Well, usually, maybe it's administrators, maybe it's liquidators, maybe it's LPAs, whatever. They will quite often look for an experienced developer to come in and take over, right? And they know the reality of all of that. And by the time that's happened, you know, we're dealing with a site that's been in administration. It's only been in administration for about 3 or 4 months. And the administrator's bills are already into 6 figures. And the forecast bill is over £250,000. And anyone who's dealt with administrators before knows that that's just a minimum, right? That's not it's never going to be only, you know, 300K. It's going to be half a bar by the time they're done, if not longer. So it's extremely expensive to insert that into, you know, some people describe it as, even in a single house deal, the liquidators or whoever, the receivers see the equity in one. You think, oh, well, you know, this house is worth £1 million. I only owe 500 grand against it. Okay. Don't want it to get repossessed, but I should be okay. It's one of the most dangerous things to do in the world, because they just see that £500,000 and think, what's the game then? How much can I get in fees?
Yeah.
You know? And how much of that can I get in any other nefarious or non-nefarious ways from the poor person who's been liquidated? So I don't.
Plus you give the control away to someone else, and they, on paper, they act in your interest, but at the same time, if they're not, like, then they don't really have that same.
Remember a couple of weeks ago, expect people to behave as they are incentivized, right?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. They're going to act in their own interest first, right?
Yeah. It's totally true.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of not getting into that situation in the first place, you know, some of that will come back to the organizational and the design style points and your contingency plans for this, that, and the other. You know, there's something to be said for, and obviously it depends on the site, depends on your skill set as well, because you might be a great trade by trade project manager, right? Now, there's pluses and minuses to that. I wouldn't be doing it myself because I'm not a great trade by trade project manager, but I've worked on projects where I've used a PM and done it that way. And the dependencies are much fewer, right? The dependency really is the project manager, right? If something goes wrong, particularly, and you've got building control, and you've got warranty inspectors, and you've got all of that going on, then they're going to check that the piling's been done right. They're going to check that the block and beam's been done right. They're going to check everything that you need them to check along the way. If one link in that chain starts to let you down, it's a hell of a lot easier for you to manage that problem. If you're just using a main contractor, you might even not see that problem that the main contractor's battling with all the time with their employees and or their subbies. And so there's two sides of the story. Do you want to pretend it's not happening and sort of have your head in the sand on it? But trade by trade isn't always the way forward, and it obviously depends on, you know, how much focus and headspace and all that you've also got. But if you just employ a main contractor, then think you can leave the site alone, again, you're bringing things on yourself by the way that there is no point where you go, until practical completion is achieved and it's been handed over or sold, or, you know, and I mean at the moment I'm suffering with an unbelievable situation with a supposedly ethical company. We've exchanged contracts and they're negotiating after the fact, and I'm just like, what do you think you're doing? What do you think you're doing? You know, I've had to rehome people as part of this project, something I've taken this really, really seriously. It's taken a ton of time and effort. The whole reason why I did a conditional exchange is so they couldn't do what they're doing now, and they're still doing it. And it's unbelievable. And actually, I know that they're a care company that are going to sell it into a fund. And happily enough, the CEO of the fund was at an event of ours on Friday in London. So that was rather helpful, wasn't it? They don't know that yet, but I'd love it if they were watching this video and then had just found out, because they might then understand if the contract gets unwound, I may just go to the big man himself, because that's now a line of communication that is open. So thanks to Rod for sorting that one out. That's ideal. But it's just I hate dealing with people where the only way you can be fair is just by being the biggest arsehole that you can be, because they just will not play by the rules. The one guy said to me on the phone this week, he said, it's not personal, you know. And I said, well, there's a couple of things there, right? I'm not taking this personally, but you have a number of times in this process effectively called me a liar, and I don't have a lot if I don't have my reputation. So my integrity is important to me, you know.
The thing is, something might not be personal, but it's actually personally affecting you if they don't play by the rules, and that is personally, like, you need to defend yourself from it, because those are consequences, right?
Yeah. So until you read the right act, they don't do anything. You know.
Yeah, I hate when people say, "Oh, it's not personal." Yeah, it fucking is personal, because it's affecting me personally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's really a proper pain to deal with things like that. But
I mean, they had the gall to say to me that, well, really, when we said to you, they tried to negotiate 150 grand off the price for something that's not in the contract, and also it's not even a real problem. And what it's shown me, apart from anything else, is, you know, they're in charge of tens of millions of pounds worth of people's money, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're like, well, we've had this roof report done on the roof of the block. I'm like, yeah, buy a roofing company. Surprisingly, the solution, I know you're not going to believe this, but the solution is using that company's products, and that will solve all these problems that aren't even there. The roof's not letting in water. There's no problem. It's been recovered 4 years ago. It's in great nick. But they were like, well, you need to take 150 grand off the price. But I really don't. You need to lose your deposit. How about that? How about we work on you? You lose your deposit, and the agent is teed up to sell it to somebody else for more money because the market's gone up. So that's fine. That's fine. But I'm not giving you. You're not having your deposit back out of principle. So I tell you, why don't we just complete and we'll get it sorted. So instead, we are in order to get to the goal, I am basically helping them out. And the best bit was from my roofer, who's a great guy, who went to them and he just said, what are you doing? Do you realise the conflict of interest in the people who've prepared this report? Come up, it's a flat roof, it's a massive flat roof, right? He said, it's only 2 stories high. He said, come up on the roof with me and we'll talk you through the whole. So where they said here, this is moisture, this is a fleece-backed rubber, right? It's 700 quid a roll. It's really expensive stuff. it's not wet. Touch it, feel it, you know. And the fact that when they asked me if they could have a look at the roof earlier this year, and what they've actually done is perform a semi-destructive roof survey. And it's like, well, there are a couple of holes in it now because you've drilled them without my consent, right? So they are just, I can't believe that these people are trusted with the roles that they are, but they are.
Fuck.
pretty much. But that's you know, what's inside and outside of your control, and how do you react to it when it hits the fan like that? And also, what really happens is, like for example, my roofer. A lot of people could have walked away from that situation and said, "Well, I did the work years ago. You're all right, mate." But because of that relationship side of things, you know, he was straight up there, absolute belter. Because of other favours and goodwill and whatever else you want to call it over the years, other people in the area have been able to give some support and help out, and all sorts of bits and bobs that, you know, I've had to call in, which I'd rather not call in, obviously, but they've been there to call in, and that's where that sort of relational value really kicks in.
Yeah, and the communication, as you say, like, you know, when things do go wrong, and what to, you know, there's been some prime examples of developers ceasing communication altogether, and what that does to investors is sets alarm bells off, and like, then they start making up kind of stories in our own head. Well, why aren't they communicating? Like, is this even worse than we think it is? What don't we know? Oh my God, is this? And you start catastrophizing. And actually, the situation might not be that bad, but if there's no clarity, there's no communication going on, we're human, you know, we're going to start filling in the blanks ourselves with, you know, and we're not generally developers, so we don't know. So we could fill those blanks, those gaps, with all sorts of things. And on the opposite side, I've seen great examples of where developers have kept communication lines open with their investors, and actually where there are sophisticated or experienced investors, very often developers at a certain level themselves who want to kind of get into passive investing, still do their own stuff, but get into passive investing as well. And where those communication channels have been kept open, and it has been, listen, this is the situation, this is where we are, those investors have actually kind of come in and as part of the team and helped sort the situation out, because, you know, they are or can be a resource if they've got the appropriate experience or the appropriate contacts. You need more cash? Oh, well, it just so happens. And I've seen actually where you bring people in, and of course you can't bring everybody in. You don't want the world and his wife getting involved in something they know.
You don't want management by committee. No.
Yeah, totally. But where it's appropriate, people can help. So yeah.
Well, and that comes down to, I mean, you could talk about that in the context of COVID, for example, when we all heard stuff that was communicated to us and thought, I don't really believe that. I'm not really sure that's true. I'm sure a lot of the time there's good intentions behind that. But as soon as you start, call it whatever you want, nudging behaviours with certain agendas in mind, lying to people, treating people like they're stupid, all of these things were done to us by multiple governments around the world in the last few years. And what happens, exactly what Helen was saying, you fill all these blanks in your head. We're not virologists, we're not doctors, we're not all these things, but we're intelligent, sentient human beings who've got viewpoints on things and know that we've talked before, haven't we, about things like health advice and how it's not on the money. We were talking last week about sugar tax and things like that, weren't we? And what happens, it just erodes your trust in authority, administration, and the government. It means that they can't then organise things as well as they would like. And it's just down to, there were some really good examples of pieces of communication during the pandemic. Sadly, none of them came from the UK. You know, I think Macron stood up, I think it was March 2020, and he said, look, some stuff's going to go wrong here. We're not going to know exactly what we're doing every day, right? But we're going to do our best. We're going to communicate, and we're going to try and do what's right for the people of France. And you just thought, what a lovely, it's self-evidently that should be true, because everyone in politics should be there for that reason. I think we probably agree that Mr. Johnson may well not be in politics for that reason. But what a nice thing to be able to say. It's a bit like, I like to frame a conversation with a vendor, if we're talking about a deal, and say, look, we're here because you want to sell it and we want to buy it. And we're starting with those premises in mind. So, of course, you want as much money as possible. Of course, I want to give you as little money as possible. But let's set those interests aside and talk about the nuances and the bits of the deal and what's important to you within the deal. And only once have I sat with someone, and he was a particularly difficult character. And even after an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2.5 hours, we're still on the subject of money. How much money can I get? All that matters is the money. And I've gone about the problem, 5 different ways and said, well, apart from anything else, you realise that, if you sell this to, it's a big portfolio, if you sell it to a fund, they're not going to give a damn about your tax position and trying to make sure you've got the most money in your pocket. They're not going to give a damn about what sort of insurances, warranties, all the rest of it you've got to walk away with. So I really would encourage you to try and look past. And I actually started the whole conversation by saying, look, if you sell it to a fund, you will get more money than we will, certainly nominally. What I might be able to do is construct something so you've got more money in your pocket one way or another, and or look at it this way, who do you want to gain the benefit of this deal? Do you want it all for yourself? Well, that's not how deals work ultimately. Do we want to have some benefit for ourselves and kind of try and share that benefit equally? Or do we want to make sure HMRC walk away with X million quid on the back of this deal, this negotiation? Is that a good idea? Obviously it's not, right? So that's why we're going to talk about it in this particular context in this way. And we'll try and work something out that works for everybody. If it doesn't, then jolly good. This is the same conversation where the chap told me, it's all right, a cash buying company were going to buy it. They made him a good offer, apparently, which, as you know, rarely happens. And it was a corporate purchase. They were going to buy the limited company, and they were going to do it in 2 weeks. 2-week completion. And there was no problem because they were going to use their in-house lawyers to do it. And I was just like, well, they're not. They're not, because in a corporate sale, it's not going to be possible to do that unless their solicitors want to risk getting struck off. Then they're not going to do that. So, but the trouble is, people can be in charge of massive numbers of assets, and it's not even their fault. They've never sold anything before. They've been accumulating this portfolio for 30, 40 years, and they don't understand, that there are slightly more important, that it might be quite a good idea to get the exit right and not believe the sharp suit who turns up and says, yeah, we'll give you 90p and 95p in the pound for this, no problem. We love buying stuff like this, and we'll do all that, and we'll pay you legals. It's like, no, you won't. No, you won't. That won't happen. So I said, in the nicest possible way, when the conversation happens of why the price needs to come down, just remember these words, right? And keep my number, and then we'll talk again, because that will happen in this scenario. What they're offering you is a unicorn. Take the hand off at the elbow, but it won't happen. It won't happen.
Yeah, that's great. Negotiations 101.
And that's where people focus on the wrong thing, right? He was obsessed with headline figure, and of course, which is why actually how you frame it is so important. But surely, and you must see this a lot, Piotr, with Jay and the auctions, sometimes, and I would say quite often, actually, it's certainty of exit that is required above anything else. It's why people go for cash buyers, right? Isn't it? It's like, it's going to be quicker because time could be, the most important factor if people are under deadlines or in another chain. But actually, certainty of exit, this is going to happen. You can be promised the world, but whether that materializes.
Yeah, well, sometimes people need certainty, not just like to actually make more money somewhere else. They just need more the liquidity from the sale of the property in order to get things sorted somewhere else. And there was one client who wanted to, they actually wanted the certainty of sale of their property because I think they lived in Portugal and they were going to move somewhere else. and they wanted to make sure the sale of the property goes through within the tax year in Portugal, because then they pay no tax, and then even 10% less of the sale for the property means they walk away with 30% more profit because they don't pay the tax that they would pay on the
Yeah.
capital gains. So it's sometimes it's that kind of thing. So just trying to understand why people want to do something and what the end goal for them is, and how when everything goes through this system ends up is such a valuable thing.
Totally
Yeah. What
agree.
is their incentive? What is their motivation? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a few comments. It's been quite lively in the chat today. Um, Charlie says nothing makes me more nervous than people going quiet on me,
Me too, Charlie. Me too.
or strategically evading simple direct question. Oh, I hate that. I so hate that. It's like when you ask a question, simple question, and someone changes the subject, or they go into some sort of like explanation that takes like 5 minutes instead of giving me the normal yes, no, this is the number. Anyway, Andy on LinkedIn says, stick to your guns, Adam. That whole drilling without honest permission is like criminal damage.
That's
Totally
what I
agree.
was thinking. That is technically criminal damage, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the thing is, like I was saying, that the naivety of even doing that 5 months after exchange, that was 5 months
Oh,
after. Why are you doing that? What do you think you're gonna? The contract was conditional on vacant possession. That's the trigger condition, right?
Right.
VP's been achieved. They've tried to argue the toss up. Well, VP hasn't been achieved. I'm like, well, again, it comes back to relationships, doesn't it? The last two tenants in the block that I've rehomed, as in the last two to leave, are both willing to sign a statutory declaration that they're living elsewhere. I've got copies of their tenancies. I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other. And like, the contract doesn't say you get to walk around the building and confirm VP, right? You complete. If it's not vacant, I'm liable to be sued. Again, I'm not a liar, right? I've waited till absolute VP has been achieved, and then one business day to make absolutely sure there's no doubt at all. And the thing is, you have to try and deal with it and get it over the line, which is some of what we've been talking about today. With if contractors need to, recently we kicked a contractor off a job. It's only the third time we've ever done it in 300 refurbs, right? So, and I wish it wasn't. Well, and I'd say there's been 20 times where some people have wanted to kick them off, and I've managed to get involved and bring everybody back from the brink and keep everybody placated enough, because I'm like, there will be significant losses here in money and time if we do this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you might be at the stage where you know you're never working with XYZ Building Construction Limited, whatever, again, fine, no problem. But in order to get to the goal, this is how we're going to do it. We've agreed this, we go back to what we agreed at the start. We talk through how we're going to deal with these problems. We're not looking to screw anybody over. Let's not get to the stage where we have to go back to the contract or the this or that or the other. And, generally speaking, so that's probably worked, hasn't it? 80 to 90% of the time. The 10 to 20% of the time it hasn't. Guess what? What's come home to roost is right. It's cost us significant amounts of time and money and headspace and all the rest of that comes with it. But sometimes, you've got a genuinely bad actor who slipped through the net somewhere. Or, a bit like a tenancy, you've got someone who's been fined for years, something personal happens, they don't say, they don't want to say, they try and carry on, and they have I've had people, one of those times, a guy he had a full nervous breakdown and couldn't even come back to the site to get his tools. And he was lovely about it. He was like, look, keep the tools, sell the tools. I'm really sorry, I've screwed you over here and all the rest of it. And it just, nothing could be done. It couldn't be helped. So that's the nature of the beast. And it comes back down to those, those relationships, have been able to pull in that goodwill when you need to. Like you will know, Helen, people, if you've got, if you communicate with investors and say, do you know what, we have got a challenge we weren't expecting here because of X or Y,
Yeah.
Only the true psychopaths are going to go off the chart. Most people are going to say, thank you for being transparent about it.
Yeah.
What's the plan to get round it? When are we getting into plan B and C? And what happens now if, which is the right way to be dealing with it. They're not going to go and lose their marbles at stage one. If they are, you probably don't want to work with them again as a developer from the developers end, do you?
Exactly. And that's why, I speak as much as, I talk about people doing due diligence on their investing. It's why I say it again and again and again. And you guys have heard it so many times. Be very bloody careful whose money you take as well, because there will be a point like that. If it's a development of any size or any kind of length of time, there will be a point at which something goes wrong. And if you've got it handled, great. But if things do deteriorate, then you're going to have to, or you really ought to, even from a moral perspective, have a conversation with your investors. And if you don't want them losing their marbles, then, managing those that's a much easier conversation to have if you've managed expectations up front and you know who you're dealing with. If this is a first-time investor that's got no idea about property investment, you've taken all their life savings, oh, good luck with that conversation. You've got a highly emotional investor who is clueless that this is a natural thing that happens in property developments. It's not a sophisticated investor that's been around the block, has seen developments that should have been promised that was 6 months that are still in it 5 years, mentioning no names, and seeing people disappear, seeing the whole gamut, and know that the end date or the repayment date is never the date. So don't even think about planning where that money goes on that date, because that never happens.
Well, this is it. And when the head goes into the sand or the mobile phone goes off or whatever it is, what's effectively happening is you're going from, the headline figures that got people involved in the project to what could still be salvaged plus or minus a bit, but return of investment becoming the key part, to income the liquidators, and people are getting 30 pence in the pound. I mean, that literally is the path of, of how value gets destroyed, and it all gets destroyed, or 80% of it gets destroyed at that point when the phone's gone off and the communication's gone down, because people have given up and the keys come in. Once there's appointments of the relevant people, you just know all you've got is months and years of pain and the likelihood of getting a really big haircut. But that's all avoidable, because ultimately what's happening is those liquidators are calling in the experienced developers who are going to be more expensive, do want big contingencies when they take on a project halfway through, like we were saying, and they can do it. They don't really want to do it necessarily, but they can do it. But they know the margins need to protect them, and so the offers get kicked. Because rather than them working on a nice new clean site from the start where they can be accountable for everything, they're going to demand. There is more risk. They're going to demand a higher premium. Your contingency for coming out of the ground might be 5 to 7%, if you've got your design done right and all the rest of it. Your contingency on coming into something that someone's already done is going to be 25 to 30%. It's bound to be. And it makes me, I've seen a few over the years. I've tried to buy this property once, a lovely part of the world. They were overdeveloping the plot, and they'd made a big mistake. Well, they made a number of big mistakes. One, they put a massive swimming pool in. I mean, the cost to run this thing would have been insane. They just hadn't done the numbers on it, right? But secondly, they had a beautiful double staircase, unbelievable thing. Went up onto the first floor, and the rooms they built were like rabbit hutches, because it was going to be used for like Airbnb or whatever. And I was like, why have you got like a 4,000 square foot with a massive swimming pool in a basement, or mansion style property, and then 9.5 square meter rooms? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It needs completely rebuilding. But these guys started. This was in about 2017, I want to say. These guys have started this project in 2004, right? And the thing is, they were still expecting to make quite a lot of money by selling it to someone at this point. I'm just like, you're just not being realistic. You'd be incredibly lucky to get your money back. And the thing is, most of this needs to be redesigned. Building out what you've designed is never going to work. So I can't come in and finish what you've done. I've got to start again. I'm going to start again. I can keep the superstructure, right? But there's so much work to do. And when you costed it as if, well, it'll only be 100 grand to finish it off, it's like, yeah, in 2009 it would have been, yeah, but it's 2017. So imagine all of those conversations at the moment of the stuff that you were saying has been brought to you, Piotr, where, I mean, these guys who've drilled my roof illegally, as we've just established, they were moaning to me saying, well, we're going to spend 650 grand on the internals. This block of flats is in good condition, right? Now they're getting into the care sector, so they do, modifications are inevitable, right? But 650 grand is an awful lot of money for what they're going to have to do. And I said to him, well, I've got no sympathy. You told me when we agreed this deal 20 months ago, 20 months ago, you said you'd buy it in 6 to 8 weeks, right? And if you'd done what you said, then your 650 grand would have been 500 grand, because that's how much inflation has moved up in construction in that time. So I don't know why you're coming to me to cry about that. Get on with it. I tell you what, here's the best thing you can do: complete and start the job. So that 650 is not 750. How about that? Blows my mind. Blows my mind. The guy phoning me must just absolutely detest when he's got to have a conversation with me. I've read him the right act back to front, and I couldn't even. What concerns me most is someone behind somewhere is sitting, investing in these guys, thinking they're doing some good work. It's like, it's just not, mate. They're awful. They're absolutely awful at what they're doing. It's a disgrace. But there we go.
I think this is a good sort of conversation to illustrate to people the pains of not keeping things in control, right? And then actually doing things properly as they should be, and pricing things as they should be. And I think a lot of people don't price things as they should be because they don't start with the same level of conversation you start with. Like the sellers want to get the
Well, I think
buyers
Piotr's
want to release
frozen,
money and getting to the consumer. Oh, sorry. So I was just saying, like, I think people tend to cut corners to start with because they don't start with the same level of conversation as you do with sellers. Because if you just make it open that obviously sellers want the most money, buyers want the least money, to pay the least money, then you can start really focusing on the really important things, and that's how you get to the prices that actually include everything that you need to include in the transaction, because you know what's important to you. You also take care of what's important to the seller, and that's how you achieve the win-win-win situation.
Exactly. And also one of the things that this deal is bringing back to the fore for me, something I've said for years and years, is that when you get involved in options or conditional exchanges or whatever, when you introduce time, you introduce a different kind of risk. Those guys introduced a different risk by allowing a conditional contract in a time where construction inflation is rising massively. Right, it was their choice. They didn't have to do it this way. We could have done it in a much more sensible and pragmatic way. They could have been on that site within a month, because we could have done a phased construction. We could have rehomed people accordingly and moved people around throughout the block. But again, they didn't have. I know we have all of us have a particular passion for structuring deals in the right way, in the way that Piotr was just saying. Whereas these guys just didn't have a clue of how to do all of this stuff. And it's a bit like I always get on my high horse when people go on a course. So let's say it's a course about lease options, right? And they think then that what they're going to go and they say, right, my strategy is lease options. It's like, where do you start with just how wrong that is? Options are a fantastic tool if they're used in the right way, right? So is exchange of delayed completion, subject to planning, etc. There's tons and tons of ways to do it. Back-to-back sub-sales are great when they're used in the right way, etc., etc. But you don't just learn one thing and do one thing. You've got to look at the deal and then say, right, what's the best way of executing this deal? Because what can happen once you've got that deal secured, you can, if you've got a really good deal, this was evident to me 10 years ago. If you've got a really good deal, it doesn't matter if you're going to do an option or this or that or the other. But what will matter is, what will your returns be? How much of that equity will you give away? What risks will you take with the lending that you use and how you structure it? And this is where I started getting really hacked off with, as it was back then, the state of the property trading industry. Because I was like, why are you teaching people this stuff? And the reality is they were doing it because one thing like lease option, whatever the flavour of the month is, social housing might be the flavour of the current environment, right? Just by you create a hook, you end the price in a 7 plus VAT, we know all of that stuff, and then also the training provider doesn't care, because then you're going to need to buy the next course when you realise that everything's not about options. But they don't say up front, you know what, I will be able to. I'm not saying none of the trainers do it, because there are some good ones out there, but they don't start with a, look, this is going to be hard, this is going to be a comprehensive course, expect it to be delivered in the same way that an online masters or something would be delivered, because there's going to be that much content, there's that many things to go through. There's one of the guys who's in our boardroom club, he's got a great approach to talking to potential JV investors, and he starts with, you might think that if this is going to be like the deal and the money, and you're the money and I'm the deal and that's that. And he said, here's a list of everything that I need to think about and consider. And there's something like 325 points on that list, right? And he says, so, here's the things that you need to consider. And now we can start having you tell me which ones of the 325 you're going to do, right? And I can tell you how much time they take, how much headspace they take, how much it costs to get somebody else to do it, etc., etc. And that whole sort of, because, the right people, when you tell them that it's hard, because it is hard, they want to do it even more. They know that it's hard. The wrong people want to see the advert, and it's not even their fault per se, but they want to see the advert that basically says get rich quick. But look at the Times 100 or Forbes rich list or whatever, and tell me how many of those people got rich quick. Zuckerberg, comparatively quickly, by totally and utterly changing the face of communication and media and being the thought leader in that space. Quite quick for him. Still, 12, 13 years to be a billionaire, something like that. And then how many of the Buffett, all comparatively, all the serious wealth that he's put on, the really top rich list stuff has all come in the last 15 years. And it's the culmination of the overnight success of 75 years. It's the ultimate example of that. And that is just the way of the world. And I know social media or Instagram or whatever teaches that that's not the case, but how much hard work goes in behind the scenes of putting deals together, just as it does in taking snapshots of your beach body or whatever. It doesn't come to you. Certainly not to 95% of people. It's bloody hard work.
I like that list, 325 points. That's you should probably caveat that and say, and that's just the first month. Let's not even go. Let's not even start on month 2, 3, 4, 95. Yeah.
The thing is, he's a good guy, and he's a really diligent worker. And there's two ways of looking at those things. I've seen this used in the letting agency world, where they'll say, right, there's 280 pieces of legislation that we need to keep up with, and that's why we're charging you 12% fees or whatever the number is, right? And that's fine, as long as those people are being trained to keep up with that stuff, right? So then don't come to me and say, oh, this happened and we didn't know this. It's like, well, you told me there was 285 pieces of legislation, so you know them, right? And you're training your staff about them, right? Yeah, not always. And so if you're gonna, like everything, you've got to do what you say you're going to do, right? You've got to do what you say you're going to do.
Nice one. Few more comments. Dominique thinks inevitable go wrong with giving contractors repeat business simply due to the conscientious efforts to face the music and put it right.
I think that's a brilliant comment, and I think if only people understood that, I've had times when certainly people I've worked with really closely who have put off telling me something, and then like it's come to a head somewhere, and I go, "Oh, you're gonna go mad," and I'm like, "I'm not gonna go mad. Just tell me, and we'll fix it, right?" And then what I'm then gonna go mad about, or not necessarily go mad, but say I don't want this to happen again, is why you couldn't come to me. And if that's my fault because I'm not approachable or I've been too busy or whatever, right? If this sort of thing happens, pick up the phone. No problem. I'm not going to ball you out for it, but you've got to tell me. One time, this is terrible. I found out one of my members of staff had sent some money, and it wasn't a small amount of money. It was like a couple of grand from an account to the wrong person, and that, as in, there were two names, one company name and one bigger provider name, and they'd messed them up, and because they were basically called the same thing in the bank, and they hadn't checked the bank details properly. So it was their fault. But I only found out, 3 months down the line, because by then what she'd done, bless her, is put the money back herself.
Good.
And because the guy wouldn't get it back, wouldn't send it back. The other contractor, who was someone who'd done a job for us, 18 months ago or whatever, and was just copying a complete definite. I'm like, look, there's other things we can do here, apart from anything else. Take him to the small claims court. You didn't need to put your own, you can't take all that on you. And she was but when I sat her down and had a reasonable chat with her, I mean, it's like, that's how honest she is. It's like reverse fraud, it's unbelievable. And I said, and I said to her, this is great, because what you've shown me, like Dom was just saying there, is when the chips are down, you've shown me what you're going to do, right? But you can't not communicate it to me, And she would, when I had that chat with her, like it's like it uncorked her, and the stress just came out, and she was so grateful, and I was like, and then since then I knew she could be trusted to do basically anything. It was actually a very clever thing for her to do. Not that she engineered it in that way, but it's like you only find out about people when we said this when we went into the pandemic, didn't we? You'll see the best of people and you'll see the worst of people, and that was just government, but we obviously did see that, and mostly the worst of people, obviously. But that you only find out in those stress situations, and people who will put their hands up are gold dust, absolute gold dust, and they've probably got a friend for life there, and business for life. I'm always stunned about how many people I've had the chat with to say, not in a I'm the big I am kind of way, but a factual chat about, this is how much stuff we've got going on. These are the goals that we've got over the next 10 years and beyond. What we want to do is this is how we work. This is how payment terms and things will work. This is who'll be looking after the project. And we hope that this is one of many projects. And honestly, so many times when I used to set the jobs up, that would be the conversation. And that's now the conversation that the PM or whoever has on my behalf. And honestly, about 3% of people listen to it. But that 3% form an amazing team, like my roofer, who's done me an absolute solid on this job, on this difficult job. But it's such a shame that more people don't do it that way. It really is, but it's just the way of the world, I suppose.
Well, it's a very kind of back to relationships, aren't we? Do you want a relationship, or do you want to be transactional? And horses for courses, maybe some is appropriate in some situations, but again, with developers and investors, it's the same thing. Why not just keep your existing investors happy, communicate, do what you say you're going to do, and they keep coming back? Having to go and find them and develop trust and conversations and 15 coffees, and oh my God, I can't think of anything worse.
And it's why
wouldn't you just keep the ones you've got happy?
It's such a commercially sensible thing to do as well, because what's the most expensive thing in any business? Like client acquisition. If you're a one-person band developer, how many investors do you really need if you have that quality and depth of relationship? Fewer than 10, probably, if you're talking to the right people. So why would you be spending thousands of pounds of hours of your time and thousands of pounds of money on what's effectively marketing your skill set when you could just do it that way and, you know, carry on building and building? And the thing is, this is why you find out the people who then want to try and attract 500 people or 5,000 people or whatever, that's because down the line, they're not going to come back to the same place because they can't. They burn their bridges. They're just expected to go in. They're trying to be transactional, lift as much money out of it as possible, you know, shaft people left, right and centre, and then walk away and do it in another county, country, hemisphere, whatever it is, you know.
Yeah. Great. Well, there is a comment from Ed. Great example of keeping touch. Great Armstrong, GA. Went on missing, but the lender was happy to lend me 1.7 million because I jumped through every hoop to make the project work.
That's it. And that's another, also a classic example of when something does go wrong, and what Helen point earlier around good communication and all the rest of it, and my point around pulling people off jobs and things like that, it's inevitably the case that unless there's been a mental breakdown or they were just a very bad actor in the first place, they are the best placed person to finish the job. But you have to get through, as Helen was saying, those difficult conversations with people. And if you haven't been careful about whose money you take, or you've taken, you know, Jeff's last 100 grand or his life savings or whatever it is, you've set yourself up for a complete problem when that happens. You know, you want to work with people you want to work with people who understand risk and understand that, okay, so I don't mind taking a poke at this, but I need to have a bloody good return for doing it. But then also, and some of my more secure ones will be X and Y. It's a portfolio. Everyone should be looking at it as an investor as a portfolio of lending and investing, right? Not I just stick, even down to, I'll put, 50 grand into a crowdfunding site, let's say. Okay, well, how are you going to do it? The good ones, it's difficult to allocate the capital into the projects anyway because they get filled up so quickly. But you're going to want to put it into at least 10 projects. Putting it into one or two is just nuts. So that diversification lesson, it's such a simple concept, but it's such an important thing to understand.
You'll like this one. I don't know why it just came to mind, but somebody actually wouldn't take my money once because they did everything I advised, but they did it to me, but they hadn't got the kind of the wider context. They asked me about how much money I had to invest. And to be honest, they approached me. I've got this project, blah, blah, blah. I've got some. I'm like, yeah, I've got some money. Like, where did this money come from? I've just sold a house. It's come from that. Oh, well, we can't possibly take all that money because we just have a policy that we don't take all the money from, like a residential house sale. I'm like, so you don't know about like the other stuff that I do, right? But it was just, I think that's the only time I've ever had my money refused. It's like, oh, okay. Like
it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because compliance, in a way, that's not directly about compliance. But I had that this week when I sent someone some proof of funds for something. I've worked with them before, and they said, "Oh, this isn't good enough because it hasn't got your full name on it, and it hasn't got this, and it hasn't got that, and it hasn't got the other." And by that point, I was not in front of the computer anymore, and I was like, "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this is someone who's come and seen me present and has looked me up on Company's House and has done all the rest of the relevant stuff before." And I'm like, how could I have got that screenshot in that short period of time with today's date and time on it? Because it only said Adam. They were like, oh, I'm not sure that's. And I was like, I've never had a bank or a senior debt lender or anyone else knock that back, right? You're knocking it back because you're over-engineering. It would be, unless I was the world's fastest Photoshop wizard, which my tech skills are well documented as not far from perfect, it just wouldn't have been possible for me to do it in any other way. It's genuine, and I was like, they're like, can you do this? I was like, I can't. I'm on the way to give a presentation somewhere. I've got my phone. I can't take screenshots on my phone because the banking app won't allow you to take screenshots for security reasons. I haven't got a second phone that I can take a photo of the first phone with or whatever. So no, take it or leave it. It's just what it's got to be. What will be will be. no biggie. But compliance skills business is not ideal.
Yeah, I was trying to open a bank account in Portugal 2 weeks ago, and the amount of things they asked me about, and literally it was like a mountain of documents, and I had to prove that I'm employed in the UK. And then I was like, well, most get paid with dividends, so I'm don't have pay slips and stuff, or we can open a bank account for you. You either have to prove that you're employed, or you have to give us a document to say that you're unemployed. I'm like, I wanted to cry, but anyway, it's
There was a good one in Malta. My friend only managed to get her bank account opened because she took her husband with her. And yeah, this was not that long ago either. And he kind of gave us some like there was transfers evident between them for like housekeeping and bits and pieces. And because he gave her housekeeping, she was allowed to open a bank account.
wow.
Can
Wow.
you imagine if that had been me?
I would love to have been a fly on the wall if it had been. My goodness me, that would have been good. So now we know if you just need to transfer money to people randomly and call it housekeeping, and they can open a Maltese bank account. There you go.
Yeah, and that's
What a
perfectly
stringent system of due diligence that is. Yeah.
And that's why we're on the grey list, right?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Well, there's a couple of more comments which we finish off with. Lorraine is saying something to relate to what Adam was saying. I'm always concerned if only have good news. If I only have hear good news, I want to hear all about news and problems.
It's such a good point. Like no project ever goes smoothly, right? No, it's like, yeah, it's on time. It's this. It's like, just say, well, yeah, there was just say it. Like that's building credibility and honesty and trust. Nobody's life is one-sided. Nobody's life is how social media portrays it. Don't pretend projects are.
Do you know, Lorraine's been a member of PIP in Birmingham for some years, and I don't know if she was at this particular meeting I'm thinking of. I think it was only the second PIP meeting we ever did, right? So, and the main speaker let us down like on the morning, like with a text. It's like, what are we going to do? So I got up and ad-libbed a presentation about a deal that I'd done where it had gone wrong. A few things had gone wrong. And that the primary thing that had gone wrong was the revaluation, and then how the broker dealt with that and the position it put us in and all the rest of it. And, it all came good in the end. And a lot of that was to do with good communication. And I'd managed the investors' expectations from the very beginning and said, look, these are where the pockets of risks are that we can't necessarily control. And one of those things happened. And it worked out absolutely fine. We've still got that project today, and it's been a great cash flowing asset for years and years and years. But after I did that presentation, so many people came up to me and said, well, I've never heard anyone stand up before and talk about things that have gone wrong. And I'm like, well, but you've got to do that. If you don't, like Lorraine's nailed it there, it sounds like a scam. It's like the old, what's the guy, Bernie Madoff. And if you ever saw a graph of his returns, they just went like this, like for what, like 15, 20 years. It's like, it cannot be. How could you think that could be real? But he had, what did he have? Like billions invested by the end of it. And it's just like, you guys are professional, if it sounds too good to be true. I mean, we have this all the time we've had it all the time. I know we've had some great ding dongs in the PIP group about Forex trading and the likes, and not that nobody makes money out of it, but the operation out of someone's shed where you just need to send them 100 grand and they'll crack on with it, that's probably not gonna be okay, right? And their background is they used to sell apples on the market or something. It's probably not going to work. It might do, but I'll give you less than the 1% chance of getting your money back. And that's the reality of it. And then they say, yeah, but it makes 4% a month. It's like, no. You see, it's a zero-sum game with frictional costs, I'm afraid. I they just don't want to hear it, do they? They just don't want to hear it, unfortunately. Such a shame.
Nice one. Cool. Well, last comment from Guy as well. Again, it's about the kind of monitoring and surveys and inexperienced
Great point.
investors. Yeah, paying
I
for
think
that.
it's a really, really good point, because apart from anything else, it's like you can get into that mindset, and you see a lot of developers who are like, oh, building control, oh this, oh that, oh the other. Everyone's a negative, and it's like, no, there might be someone who's got 30 years experience who can give you the benefit of some of that experience, and it's legally needed as part of the job. Or like guys just said, you can see the monitoring surveyor and the positives of the report that they'll produce, rather than seeing them as a blocker to. And again, some of that also comes back to great organisation in terms of. I mean, we've got someone in Boardroom Club who's struggling a bit at the moment on a development, but part of the reason has been the monitoring surveyor has been really, really slow at getting the reports back. So it's been sort of 3 weeks to draw down and things like that from visit, and that's not good enough, and those are just contingencies and risks that need to be managed. But obviously it can be a positive, and it can be used as a piece of communication, to keep everybody in the loop.
That transparency buys goodwill and trust with investors.
Brilliant. Okay, well, pretty much we think we reached the conclusion of today's session, and it's 11:11, so definitely a very significant time to finish this chat. Thanks everyone for the a flurry of comments today. It's been a very engaging chat by the sound of it. And so, yeah, thanks Adam, thanks Helen. A great chat today.
Thank you, Piotr.
And see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.